Okay, so turn things over to you,
Perfect.
Bernat. Thank you for being here with us today.
Awesome. Could you all see the slides?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dee, and thank you all for being here. My name is Bernat. I was recently, as Dee mentioned, a legislative fellow in the office of Senator Coons, working in the energy and environment team. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about food loss and waste, the impacts that it has in the country and globally, but also the opportunity that we have to center food loss and waste issues in the climate agenda. This is sort of a conversation, so if you have any questions at any point, feel free to stop me, ask a question. Happy to do so. We don't have to keep the questions till the very end. Wanted to start, of course, with a disclaimer that any of the views and opinions expressed here do not represent the Office of Senator Coons or any of my past employers, especially at the very end, while I'll be talking about some of the legislation that was introduced today on this issue. Can talk about the contents of the legislation, but not about any of the plans or efforts moving forward on that. So really wanted to start with Menti. I don't know if you have all used this, but I think it's a good opportunity to kind of gauge a little bit of your brain and kind of like what you think of food loss and waste issues. So would welcome you to go to menti.com or scan the QR code on your phone. It's just 3 questions, but it really, I think, will help us pick your brain and kind of know a little bit about food loss and waste issues. And so I'm gonna change the sharing and you'll be able to access this. Let me go let me stop sharing. And then we are gonna go all right. And hopefully you can see these. You can still, if you haven't done it, you should be able to see it now. You can go to menti.com and use that code. And really the first question that I wanted to know was kind of what comes to mind when you're thinking about these issues, when you're thinking about food loss and waste. Welcome any kind of thing that comes to your mind when you think about it. And really there is no right or wrong here. Awesome. Food insecurity, energy, vegetables, totally. Wasted resources, great point. And you'll see that these are going to be some of the issues that I'm going to mention throughout the presentation, the opportunities that food loss and waste, that we have on resources, specifically on food insecurity as well, and how these are also issues of climate and energy, inefficiency, of course. So we can go to the next one, which is, we have already some people that have voted on it, which is how many pounds of food does the US waste every year?
That one popped up for me first. So
Okay, good to know. Good to
they
know.
seem to be out of order, but or random or something.
So probably you all have voted on these. So the right question on these is 119 billion pounds of food that is wasted every year.
Did we all get it right?
I think only one person got it right. And then the last one that I have is really which percentage of US greenhouse gas emissions is food loss and waste responsible for? So thinking now about the connection of food loss and waste as a climate issue. And I won't give that away. This is something that I'm going to cover later on the slides, but want you to start thinking on it. So 6 to 10 you're going on the right track. So let me go back to the presentation, but definitely all the points that you mentioned are things that I'm going to be covering on that resources and and wasted food and inefficiency. So I really wanted to start also by defining food loss and waste. So when we think about food loss, that's when food unavoidably becomes unfit for the consumption. You can think about it at the very beginning, where we're thinking about farming, for example. Extreme weather events happens. There is some food that just will never make it out of the farmer or like farms. But also think about everything else, manufacturing, the transportation that happens with food, and when food just goes wrong, and or there is even just a slight inconvenience with the food, never makes it to the consumer. But there's also food waste, which will be that uneaten food or inedible parts. Think about peels, bones, and those go to a series of destinations. For example, composting, anaerobic digestion facilities. They also go to landfills. So think about they go to be decomposed most of the time. And so when we think about all the food that is made in the US, you'll see this is in tons, 241, but you'll see that 80 million tons in the US is wasted. That, as I mentioned before, equals to 119 billion pounds of food. And it is, to make you think about it differently, it's about 130 billion meals and more than 408 billion dollars in food that are thrown away every year. This equals to about 30 or 40% of all the food in America. And importantly, 40% of that wasted food happens in our homes, while the other 60 happens in commercial settings. So retailers, restaurants, hospitals. And as you mentioned in that Mentimeter, you mentioned resources. And that was my next point, which is that even if that food is wasted, we're still also wasting all the energy, water, and work that had been put into place in order to get that food. And so when we think about the impacts of that, we see that 6% of US greenhouse gas emissions, but we use 16% of cropland use, 24% of all the landfill is actual food waste, and we use 22% of all fresh water. And just to give you a perspective of that, if we put all of the uneaten food, so all the food waste, and we were to place it in just one single farm, it would be over 3/4 of the state of California. It will use all the water in California and Idaho combined. And every 20 seconds, you will be able to put 80,000 pounds of food in a tractor every 20 seconds and for a whole year. So that's the amount of food that we're generating and that is going to waste. Importantly, also, you mentioned food insecurity, and that is the other part. We know that 1 in 10 Americans are food insecure. That includes a lot of the times many children that are food insecure. And that means that they're just not able to access sufficient, affordable, and nutritious appropriate food. And so think about that much of what we consider waste is actually perfectly edible and could be going to people that are in need of that food. And as I mentioned at the very end, also the value of that food. We are losing about $310 billion to the food waste, and most of that is at the consumer level. And so I wanted to talk about that opportunity, about 6% of greenhouse gas emissions, and the opportunity that we have to tackle climate change and methane as well. And so the UN has this study that shows that if all food loss and waste in the world were a country, it would be the 3rd source of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, just behind the US and China. And so you can see here, it is based on just carbon dioxide, but you can see that food loss and waste will be the 3rd biggest country. I think when we think about climate change, we've always been thinking about it as, we need to solve it, it's an issue. But I think I want to highlight here the opportunity that we have, right? We have an opportunity domestically and globally to tackle food waste and not just increase food security, but also be tackling climate change. And as I mentioned, about 30 to 40% of all food ends up being food waste in the US, and that would be at the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as nearly 100 coal-fired power plants. And so I want you to think, when we're thinking about food loss and waste, that the climate impacts of that go through the farm, till the landfill. And so you can think about the contribution of greenhouse gas emissions from farm. You can see here, for example, land use, livestock methane, but also all the tools that are being used in order to make sure the food grows. But also think about the whole process, right? Going to manufacturing, going to retail, the transportation that we're using in each of those stages. But then at the very end, going to landfill. And this is going to be a part of my presentation here, which is the amount of food that gets into landfill and how, as it decomposes, it creates methane. So methane gives us an opportunity. Methane, we don't think about it much, or we don't talk about it much when we're thinking about climate change. But mitigating methane, it actually allows us to lower emissions within a more shorter time frame. While carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for decades, if not centuries, methane only stays for 12 years, but it is actually 80 times more potent. So when we're thinking about warming the planet, the ability that these gases have in keeping the heat trapped on Earth, methane is 80 times more potent. And so when we're thinking about targeting these methane sources, it gives us an opportunity to see those effects on greenhouse gas emissions concentrations, which is going to be critical to meet our goals. And in all of that, municipal solid waste landfills represents the third largest source of methane emissions, just after agriculture and oil and gas. As you can imagine, methane emissions in agricultural setting are extremely hard to address. There is a lot of efforts happening in technologies that we can use to reduce those emissions, but that's going to be a longer term effort. And in oil and gas, there has been actually a lot of efforts in the administration to make sure that we're preventing leaks. And in the Inflation Reduction Act was the first ever methane fee that was going to impose a fee if certain sources of methane were higher than a stipulated baseline. But municipal landfills are an opportunity. We know that they account for 15% of all methane in the US. And importantly, food waste is the #1 material that is in those landfills. So it's really important to when we're talking about food waste and we're in these climate conversations, that people understand that when food waste does decompose in landfills, it's creating tons of methane, and that provides, it's not just an issue, but it provides an opportunity moving forward. And so globally, when we think about methane, there's actually the Global Methane Pledge that started in 2021 during COP26. And it is an effort, a global effort that was started by the EU and the US to make sure that, oh, and we have a question. Yeah. The pledge now has 111 participants. It accounts for almost 50% of all the global human-caused methane emissions. And the goal is to reduce global emissions by 2030, 30% compared to the levels of 2020. However, this is a voluntary goal, and it is responsible for each of the countries to be actually advancing those efforts. And thinking about the goals that the administration and each country is doing, when we think about what the administration is doing on food loss and waste. And as I mentioned before, this is a very intersectional issue. So the administration is thinking about it from the food security, the energy, as well as the climate change perspective. There is a food loss waste reduction goal by 2030. This is the first ever goal that started from EPA and USDA. The goal is to reduce by half from the 2016 levels the amount of food loss and waste by 2030. However, as you may imagine, not really keeping up the pace to making sure that we are committing and that we are making progress. But also, as you can imagine as well, these may change from administration to administration. So there really needs to be legislation that actually passes to make sure that we are advancing on those efforts. As part of those goals, the US started the Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions, and that is businesses and organizations that publicly commit to making sure that in their operations, they are also reducing food loss and waste by house by 2030. Good question we have a question on anaerobic composting operations that produce methane. So anaerobic digestions do produce methane. I think the difference is that they're doing in an enclosed facility that allows for methane to be captured and to be transformed into energy. This is something that some landfills can actually do as well. They can actually capture the methane, generate energy, and this could be a source of revenue. But as you can imagine, anaerobic digesters are more expensive than landfills. And when we're thinking about food waste and reducing food waste from landfills, that also means potentially a source of a reduction of revenue for landfill owners. So we really need to be thinking about the opportunities that if we're reducing food waste, how do we then tackle potentially the issues that those facilities may be facing on revenue, for example. And so, but certainly there are other operations that do produce methane. It's just a way that we're controlling where this decomposing is happening. So in these digesters, everything happens enclosed, so we can capture everything. And I'll talk a little bit about then later on with legislation on why efforts should be happening higher up rather than in the landfill level. And lastly, what we have is a federal interagency collaboration. And this is a collaboration that happens between EPA, FDA, and USDA. As I was talking, these issues and these issues are touching many other aspects, right? Food security, public health, energy. And so there is a need to involve multiple federal agencies. This agreement, however, was just signed between the three agencies. It renews every 1 to 2 years. And it's really just a commitment to improve coordination and communication, but there isn't really any goals, any follow-up, or any kind of long-term commitment on that collaboration. So while these are good efforts that are happening in the administration, it does highlight the need for some legislation that actually ensures that these commitments are long-term. And so that's where it comes. The Farm Bill. This is where we have an opportunity to actually make those changes. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Farm Bill. The last one that we passed was in 2018. And I want you to think about it as a way to, as a must-pass bill that is ginormous, is billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of money. And so this is really a multi-layer law that is really providing funding and governing all sorts of agricultural and food programs. You can think about it as we're reauthorizing the whole Department of Agriculture and all of the different programs that the Department of Agriculture has, but it also allows us to pause and say, what's working, what isn't working, what should be expanding? And so there are a lot of titles, and as I mentioned, they cover agricultural conservation, they can have food assistance, rural development, bioenergy. So you can really think about all of the potential titles and issues that may be covered in this Farm Bill. As I said, it's typically renewed every 5 to 6 years. And this actually provides an opportunity, a predictable opportunity to actually be making changes or starting new programs. The most recent Farm Bill was on 2018, which means that it is set to expire in 2023, specifically in probably 10 days. We are not in line, I think, to get a Farm Bill passed by the end of this month, and especially potentially with government shutdown coming soon. But there is an ability to provide an expansion on the 2018 Farm Bill to make sure that some of these programs just don't lose the funding, while the Senate and the House make sure that they pass the 2023 Farm Bill. What was important about the 2018 Farm Bill is that it was the first time that there were dedicated programs and resources that were focused on reducing food loss and waste. And I would just want to highlight two of the main ones. Some of them you may be already familiar, which is the pilot programs to support state and local composting and food waste reduction. This is the CCFWR collaborative agreements. These are supports for state, local, and municipal governments that want to do some composting and food waste reduction plans. While all that I've been talking about is federal policy, it is important to highlight that all of these efforts are going to be happening at local and municipal levels, which is where all of these consumers and all of these retails and commercial stakeholders are. And lastly, the other one was for the first time there was a liaison. There was a liaison at the Department of Agriculture working on food loss and waste to really make sure that there was coordination in the programs, there was awareness of this issue, and also that there was going to be a study on data on food loss and waste. And you may be wondering, after I mentioned that there is 119 billion pounds of food that's wasted every day, the high contributions of climate change, why do we only have one person working on this? Not one person, but one main liaison working on this. And so that's a great question. And that was a start. There is an opportunity here to expand on the work that the liaison is doing and really highlight the importance of this issue by ensuring that there isn't just one main person working at USDA. And so this is the composting program that I was mentioning at USDA. Recently in 2023, USDA invested $9.4 million in this project. So really highlighting that this project has been successful and there's a need to keep expanding on it. And so when I was in the office of Senator Coons, was working on these issues and really wanted to understand how we can, have a legislation that helps us prevent and reduce food loss and waste, and that allows us to, save resources, feed people, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, mitigate methane, making sure that we're bringing nutrients back to the soil. And that's where I want to bring the food recovery hierarchy from EPA. And this really guides when we think about when we think about these issues. I've been talking a lot about landfills, and I want you to focus at the very end. This is where food decomposes, right? This is our least preferred options. We don't want food to be going to landfills. We want food to be feeding people. And so it's great that we can tackle things in landfills, we can recover methane, but that's still not solving the issue of 40% of food being wasted. We have composting, right? If we go up, we have composting. We can actually burn food, wasted food to generate energy, even though we're burning using fossil fuels, which in turn contributes to climate change. And really, I want you to focus on the first three at the very top, which is the purpose of food. It's either to feed animals, to feed hungry people, or even better, to make sure that all the food that we're generating is directly, has a goal, has a mean, goes to people, and we're reducing the amount of food and we're preventing the amount of food that is being lost and is being wasted. And so having that in mind, I was able to work on a piece of legislation that is being introduced today, which is the New Opportunities for Technological Innovation, Mitigation, and Education to Overcome Waste Act, or the No Time to Waste Act. This is bipartisan and bicameral legislation that, as I said, aims to prevent and reduce food loss and waste, increase food security, foster productivity, promote this conservation of energy and resources, and address climate change. It is being, as I mentioned, introduced today by Senator Coons as well as Senator Moran, and is being introduced in the House as well by Representative Pingree and Representative Lawler from New York. And so I'll just mention a little bit about what the bill actually does. And as I mentioned here, this is an important player now as we're thinking about the 2023 Farm Bill, and the Farm Bill is being drafted. So the No Time to Waste Act does four main things. First of all, strengthens federal agency coordination. As I mentioned, that collaboration from USDA, EPA, and FDA was just really voluntary, really up in the air based on different administration. So these make sure that this collaboration actually exists and it is authorized. It makes sure it continues regardless of the administration, and it makes sure that it involves other players like DoD, the Department of Health and Human Services, right? The amount of food that is wasted in health centers, in hospitals. What are we doing about this food? Do we know how much food is even wasted there? But also DOE, as we're thinking about food waste as a potential source of energy. So making sure it's not just three agencies, but we are thinking about this as a whole of government approach. It then establishes an Office of Food Loss and Waste at USDA. As I said, this is a way to support the role of the liaison. It makes sure that it elevates the importance of food loss and waste at USDA as something that requires an office, that requires staff that is made of professionals that are tackling this issue, that we understand how much food is even being wasted, right? I just gave you some approximates. We don't really have a study from the government that is telling us how much food is actually being wasted, from where is it being wasted. Sure, there's great resources, and I would encourage you to especially go check ReFed, that has done extensive work on this. And also the studies. Think about all the policies that are happening in Delaware, but also are happening in all states. What is actually working? And not just what's working, but what's the impact that it's having in reducing food insecurity, in reducing climate change. So not just thinking about how much food we're being wasted, but how we're tackling the issue by the policies that are being in place in state, in local municipalities, and in federal level. But also research. We can think about, how can we bring, food scraps into animal feed? Do we have new technologies to make sure that food actually actually lasts longer in supermarkets, right? So thinking about imaginative ways that we can incentivize research and innovation to make sure that we're reducing food loss and waste. But we also want to have an environment that is fostering a prevention and reduction of food loss and waste. So the Not into Waste Act actually has a new grant that encourages public and private partnerships between governments, businesses, and nonprofits to reduce food loss and waste. This is a way to complement that 2030 food loss and waste champions that was a voluntary commitment. This actually ensures that it's not just a commitment, that there are resources there, and that there is a way to foster that environment in which there is sharing of best practices, and there is also funding to make sure that these efforts are happening. It also strengthens within USDA food loss and waste in the research program. So USDA does a lot of research. Can we make sure that food loss and waste is just a priority in one of them? And that doesn't really require anything rather than a few words that say, make food loss and waste a priority. But it also makes sure that there's also support for states to make sure that they have the infrastructure and coordination to recover food and to donate food if needed. And lastly, it starts a public awareness campaign. This happens both at a national as well as at a local level. We understand that these are behavioral changes that need to happen both at the consumer and retailer level, and that takes a long time. Someone once told me that this is like wearing a seatbelt, right? How long did it take for people to really start wearing a seatbelt and to really understanding about the risks that it was not wearing a seatbelt? So this is something similar. It's not a change that is going to happen overnight or in months and even a year. This may happen 5, 6, 7, 10 years. This is something that has to happen over time. But what this bill does, it ensures that it is not something that happens at a national level. It understands that there are nuances on this issue at the local level, and make sure that we utilize community leaders to make sure that we are educating folks, and not just we're educating, we're providing tips. We're making people feel good about going to the supermarket and maybe buying a product that is using upcycled technology, and people feel like they're contributing that way. And I will go back to that that question because this is my last slide. But the Not into Waste Act is actually endorsed by a lot of organizations that are coming from actually different perspectives. We have the Zero Food Waste Coalition, which is very focused on food loss and waste. We have Bread for the World, which is focused on food security. We have Upcycle Food Association thinking about that technology. Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, Zero Waste for State and Plastic Free Delaware, but also Healthcare Without Harm, right? These are the folks that are working in the healthcare industry and are thinking about waste as how it's contributing with the healthcare industry greenhouse gas emissions. And also the Global Cold Chain Alliance, which is responsible for a lot of the refrigeration and transport of food. So really thinking that this really exemplifies how this is an issue that is impacting a lot of folks that come from way different perspectives, and that tackling food loss in ways not only, I focus on climate, but not only impacts climate, but it's impacting really all sorts of stakeholders and all sorts of issues. And so I'm really appreciative of this great support. And I believe that is all I have. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I know there are some questions, but really wanted to take the time now to answer any questions, again, to the best of my abilities. And if for whatever reason you have any questions later on, you want to learn more about it, feel free to reach out to my email as well. But I'll stop sharing. I know there were some questions in the chat, so really wanna get to that. Okay, so question on how much food loss in waste actually could be eaten without risk of health for hunters and all. Great question. So question about how much food loss and waste actually could be eaten with a risk to health. And that's a great question. And, it's not to say that all the food that's lost and is wasted can go to feed people, right? Think about a restaurant, think about a hospital. There are meals that people don't finish. That is food waste. But that can actually cannot go to refeed more people. That is food that is wasted. But we can think about ways that we can innovate and we can make that animal feed. It can allow, and this is a way actually to also tackle that farming issue and agricultural issue, right? It's quite challenging sometimes to tackle these issues in agriculture, especially methane. And this could be an opportunity to have farmers and have folks that are working in the agricultural system to be contributing indirectly in ways that may be profitable for them as well. So not everything that is food waste can actually go to human consumption. But think about a lot of the food loss that happens in farms. That again, it's that apple that looks a little finicky and that a producer is not going to be able to sell it because it's just never going to make it. Think about, there's a lot of debate now on the food labeling issue, right? There's a lot of food that's labeled in supermarkets that just hits that expiration date and is going to be thrown away. And that doesn't mean that it's not good, right? There is a lot of, you'll see expiration date or best eaten by that time, or quality may lower if eaten after blank date. And so think about also that part. There is a lot of food that's wasted, for example, at maybe fast food chain, right? That buys food in bulks that maybe loses refrigeration and just for quality concerns already gets thrown away. I think food safety is extremely important and should be taken into account. But I think this is an issue that I learned a lot from food rescue organizations that are having a little bit of struggle with that food safety, because that shouldn't be used as a way to prevent people from accessing food that is that can be eaten. Because we all go to the grocery, right? We buy some stuff, we put it in a cart, then we go to our car, we put it in the bag, and everything is non-refrigerated. And it may take 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Then we get home, we put it in the, we don't even question it, right? So I think we have to be, I guess, creative and understanding. And that shouldn't mean that we are putting people at risk or that we are minimizing the quality or the safety of the food. And so great point on the quality, on the high cost of food. And I think that's another issue. And that's the main part that was in that hierarchy, right? Was making sure that we don't have surplus food, making sure that people go to the supermarket and say, you know what, I'm going to buy for a day or two rather than a week, and rather than a bunch of food that then ends up going bad in our refrigerator. And from my conversations with a lot of stakeholders, that was actually something that people started to be more conscious after COVID, of making sure that they were, and inflation, making sure that they were just buying what they needed rather than buying a lot of food and forgetting about it, right? A lot of it just gets to the back of the refrigerator and you're like, oh, this was here for 2 weeks, forgot about it. So really, how can we be smart in making sure, again, that this is not an issue of food waste, but it's also an economical issue for consumers as well. Debbie.
Yeah, so question for you, like specific to like produce in the grocery stores, because I know, I mean, it doesn't have expiration dates on it. Are there like
Mhm.
actual health department standards or whatever for when they have to throw the stuff out? Because I feel like they're so conservative. Like Trader Joe's will throw out the bananas if they, to me, are barely looking ripe, and they're throwing them, they're getting rid of them. I didn't know if
Yeah.
there's, is it just up to the judgment of the stores, or is there something that applies to them, like some kind of rules?
I'm not super involved in that conversation. I know that has been a major issue for the Farm Bill. There's a lot of organizations like the Zero Food Waste Coalition that's really actively working on that. There is a piece of legislation that is actually on standardizing these food labels. And I believe each state may actually do it differently and may allow certain retailers to have that flexibility. I do think maybe simplistic, but I do think that a lot of it ends up being a matter of revenue for the store and understanding whether that's going to sell or no. I don't think there is, uh, uh, from my understanding and what the new bill would do is rather than putting an expiration date, I believe it adds on certain products only, uh, best quality if eaten by X date. And so it's just that the quality may decrease because of freshness, because it's been there for a week, but it doesn't mean that it actually is losing or it poses a threat to the health of the consumer. But I do know it's a very complicated issue, and I apologize that I don't have all the nuances, but it's it's a big issue, and I know it may seem like, of course, we want to standardize date labeling, but there is a lot of nuances on the issue. There's a lot of economic things into play as well from retailers and from supermarkets that may not be as willing to do that. But to my understanding, there is a lot of food that's being thrown away that just is because it hits an expiration date, and they know that the closer it gets to that and the longer it stays in that shelf, the least people are actually going to pick it.
Yeah, and specifically with produce, it doesn't have an expiration date if it's not packaged. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And so for produce really is the how does it look? And that's why I think what's it called? That innovation and that technology piece comes really into play. I learned about this spray, and this is not sponsored or anything, but it was this spray that they used in strawberries, that it was inedible and it had no color, and it made strawberries last way longer. And maybe it's the relationship that it has with bacteria, right? To making sure that it's not decomposing. But it allowed, and it looked amazing. I think there's a study. But thinking about these ways of like, how can we make sure that we can extend the life of these products that are just there in the supermarket waiting in a way that, again, does not affect health, and that it allows that all of that food is not being wasted and it's actually going to people that need it. And that also comes into play about if food is being thrown away, can there be, and that's why that we had that part in the state infrastructure on food donation. Can we make sure that if food is going to be wasted from retail or supermarket, that there is a system in place in which that food can just go to people that need it, right? And that is away from a food bank that may give you, the rice and those things that are, that are not refrigerated, but other produce and other food that would otherwise be thrown away that can go, it can be rescued and go into someone's home, and that is totally healthy to eat.
Yeah. So another question, changing the subject. So this bill, if it gets passed, is there like a timeline for implementing all these different things? Does it say in there, or is it, is it a year or 5 years or?
So the way that and I cannot speak about how it's going to go, but when I mentioned that it's a candidate for 2023 Farm Bill consideration, is that my understanding is that a lot of committee, the Agricultural Committee is now looking not just at the 2018 Farm Bill, but what proposals are there, which which ones have bipartisan support, because this is extremely important given that the House has a Republican majority and the Senate has the majority. It's really important that anything that's being considered has shown support from both parties. That makes it way easier to be in the base text. So I think ideally, if I were to be, if it was up to me, if it's in the base text of the Farm Bill, way easier, right? You don't have to negotiate the passage of the Farm Bill has to pass. It's a must pass package. So if you're already able to put certain sections of the bill in the base text, that makes it very easy to make sure that that's going to pass. Certainly, there's other things that may not be included. That can be an amendment to the Farm Bill, but I think that's the legislative package that I see as an opportunity. Because if not, a lot of these bills never get passed, or they have to be in two Congress later. There is no... there may be some wording, and I will have to go back on when things should be implemented or work should start after passage of the bill. It doesn't, I think it gives discretion. A lot of them are easy, right? Like, for example, the authorization of that interagency collaboration, or the office, right? But I think that if it goes through the Farm Bill, there is an opportunity for amendments, right? If there is something that people are not sure, parts of the bill could change. Parts of the bill could become more flexible, could become more stringent. So there is a possibility that the committee, as they are considering this bill as a potential candidate for the Farm Bill, may do some tweaks to ensure that it actually passes. So I think that the bill is really a goal, but what actually ends up being in the Farm Bill or is able to pass, maybe parts of the bill, maybe all, maybe have some changes. I think an important part of this year's Farm Bill is that because of this divide in Congress, there was a lot of focus on not having extra money for new programs, which makes it a little challenging. Because if there is, then there's this assumption that you have to cut something else. And so, again, this is not conversations that I think anyone wants to be in. It's something that the committees have to do. But there is that no new money for new programs kind of mindset. So really thinking about the ways that we can strengthen programs that started in the 2018. So you can think about the liaison becoming an office, right? We can frame it as an expansion of a 2018 priority. We can think about the educational perspective as something that USDA already wants to do. So we're just providing that. So a lot of, and you'll see in the bill when it's online, that a lot of the way that it's written, it's as a way of strengthening and expanding 2018 Farm Bill programs or priorities that were just starting, and these just expand them and strengthen them, because it's a way easier way to sell these issues rather than having to convince many senators that they should spend money on a new program on something.
So along those lines, I was hugging you with questions. Do we see any roadblocks? Like, I'm trying to picture who might be objecting to this bill. Is there any industries, lobbying groups that maybe for the money issue?
I don't think so. I think because the bill and because food loss and waste tackles so many issues, I think it's less about who may oppose it or who may want to be included, right? So you can think about, the tech people saying, like, we really need to invest in research. You have the, you name it, right? You can see the different angles, right? You have the nonprofit saying, no, it should be just about food waste. You have the food banks, you have the food rescue organizations, you have you guys as a local, nonprofit on your priorities. So I think it's less about opposing and more about everyone wanting it to be a super comprehensive bill that all their interests are there, and that's a hard part. I think another hard part is sometimes doing things from the federal level and requiring things from the federal level. I think that could be an opposing. But I think, again, I think a lot of what I learned being in Congress is that it's all about framing. And so we can think about the work and the data being a transparency issue, right? We can think about, we can make the economic argument about how much food we're being wasting from government even. And so I think it's making sure that someone who may oppose this sees the value or highlighting the angles that they care about. And that may be economy, that may be food. For farmers, it's an opportunity to sell more produces, right? More products to more people if we're able to prevent loss. And really kind of like thinking comprehensively that someone may just not want to tackle climate change, right? But there's a food security perspective, there's the energy conservation perspective, so you have to be creative on what to highlight, depending on who you're talking to and depending on the interests of that group or stakeholder. Bridget.
Hi, thank you, Debbie, for these questions. Back to something you mentioned, Debbie, real quick. The only thing that I'm aware of that is regulated, and it might be an FDA or I don't know if it's USDA. I think it's USDA. Is formula, baby formula. Like there's an actual date, and after that date is passed, they have to dispose of it. Yeah, I'm very excited by the bill because I feel like there is so many, as you were mentioning, Bernat, that so many entities that are working on this, and there's so many different angles to consider it. But the coordination of the intersectionality, as you were saying, of all of these things is just so complicated. And, having everybody be on the same page and working together, I think is like just the really difficult thing. At least that's what it seems like from our end. But my question to you is, one of your slides, and I don't know if it was something about the 2018 Farm Bill, if it was I was writing about
Maybe
down one of the goals or something, but there was something about a 10-state pilot or something.
Yes, this was, yeah.
Okay.
Let me know.
So, just like who are leading, what states if you know, are leading kind of in this food waste reduction process right now? Are there leaders who are?
Good question. And so the pilot program is the Community Compost and Food Waste Reduction Program.
Okay.
I think it was launched as it's going to be at least 10 states to make sure. But this is these collaborative agreements that are providing funding to local governments to make sure that they're addressing food loss and waste and composting. And that can go from, you name it, like it really is whatever pilot program. And on their website, I think they do give these once a year. In the website, they have all of the different programs, really the groups that were involved, the municipality, what it was aimed for. And I think this has been a quite successful program that just needs to have more funding, and not just thinking about local government, but then coordination between different levels of government. And so I'm not aware if I'm going to make an assumption, and I'm going to say that probably California is very involved in that. I know, for example, learning about the way that they manage landfills, they have a standard on that capturing of methane that other states do not have. So they're already thinking, if your landfill is this big, if it has this much food, you are required to have a gas control and capture mechanism that makes sure that not only you're telling me how much methane you're doing, but how much you're capturing and that you're actually capturing it. And so I think they are thinking about it way more. Again, I don't think, I've seen projects in New York, in Kansas, they're really all over the place. And I think that's kind of, in a way, the beauty of it, right? Like, this is an issue that's impacting everyone. And this is something that happens really at the local level, right? I've been talking a lot about federal work and federal programs, but a lot of this legislation is giving state money to do blank, or giving local governments money to do this kind of thing. And so really recognizing that, like, a lot of the coordination of composting, of garbage pickup, of landfills, of education just really happens at the local level. And you know, especially after COVID, we've seen, right, the impact of food insecurity and making sure that people can have food on their table. And so I think this is an issue that I think really anyone can be a leader, and it's just a matter of really prioritizing this and really seeing that, again, it has a lot of intersection with a lot of the issues, and that tackling these can help tackle a lot of other important challenges and issues that we have.
Awesome. I have like one additional follow-up, which is
Mhm.
I've been trying to look, and Dee, you might have a better idea of this, in Delaware. So in our state, we have a ban on incinerators, which is great. But and we have landfills, and the way our landfills and waste is handled here is a very unique situation, because it's like this public-private or public, I don't know, state enterprise. It's weird. But I do know at least the Cherry Island landfill has a methane capture. I've been trying to understand better how good it is, because I know I've heard there's levels of productivity and efficiency of methane capturing. So do you think that there is that a landfill would not be in support of a program like this, because it would be probably less of a tipping fee, less of the methane production potentially that they could be bringing in, just as something like, if we're going to be talking about this in our state at a local level to groups, I guess this would maybe be Debbie's who would be against it, and I would say probably them. And then kind of as a follow-up to that, as far as like incinerator, so I used to work in Baltimore, and the Baltimore incinerator is not good for many reasons, but anaerobic digestion versus incinerator for food processing. Our thoughts? Is there anything about this in the bill, or I don't know?
Great questions. On the first one, on the landfills, I think definitely you hit it right, that like, even if you have a capturing system, there are levels of efficiency that just because you have it doesn't mean that you're actually going to capture all the methane. I do think that it is, of course, it comes with money that has to be spent to have this system, but I do think there's the counter generation of energy and revenue for the landfill. But I have and I forgot where is it, and I can try to find that and send to you all, but there was a study made on what will happen if Maryland landfills were up to the same standard as California on that capturing, and the impacts were ginormous, of like how many landfills we're going to have that capturing system that currently do not have it. And so I do think it's a matter of raising the bar, but it also is a matter of providing some sort of support to make sure that landfill owners can actually have that. I think having something to capture, of course, is better than just letting things decompose nonstop. But of course, I think rewriting it, right, that's at the very bottom of what is great. Like, sure, I'd rather have a capturing system rather than not have it, but reducing the food waste that gets there would be way more impactful when we're thinking about the amounts of methane that we're generating. On the incinerator, lived in Baltimore for almost 6 years, so I know the issue. And yeah, definitely not. I would not be very supportive of burning food as a way of solving the issue. Not only it seems a little lazy on thinking about solving the issue. Sure, you can, I guess, create energy from burning waste, but you at the same time are using fossil fuels to do so. So you're still contributing. Sure, you're reducing the amount of waste that you have to deal with, but you're still burning fossil fuels, you're still generating CO2. You're still not solving the climate issue. And I think most importantly, you're still not solving the fact that you have 40% of the food that's being wasted. And so I think putting the effort
on the top
in those higher levels is going to have an impact in the rest. That doesn't mean that we don't have to do things that's not to say that, listen, if we have anaerobic digesters that actually works for a place, we can generate energy. Sure, that can be a solution, right? It's not like we're going to solve 40% of all the food that's being wasted, but it shouldn't come at the expense of them not addressing the reduction of the prevention of food loss and waste. And so these can be seen as a concerted effort of everything. The bill does not have any mention on that. I do know that there are some other bills. I think the Zero Food Waste Act from Senator Booker and Senator Smith does deal with support for states for composting facilities and anaerobic digesters, organic bans. I think that's something else that has been going on in California of banning organics for landfills, because that's another problem of not just the waste that gets into landfills, but how it's all mixed together and the effort that it takes for landfill owners to separate things. The more it takes, the more it decomposes, the more methane it generates. So I'm also thinking about that diversion of organics to never make it to the landfill, to make it maybe in an anaerobic digestion facility that's right next to the landfill, that is from the landfill owner. But, it never makes it into the landfill, it always goes to that. But you can think about, this is levels and levels of education, of making sure people are separating things at home, an infrastructure in a city or a town that makes sure that things go, it's a massive overtaking. And that's what I said, that it's not just about where we put money, but is where we put the will and the effort to change this.
Yeah, Bridget, that was a really good point about the landfills that sell methane to companies, because of my former life, I know we did that. I don't know where Cherry Island sells their land to, their methane gas to, but in other states, we definitely, I used to work in the chemical industry. We definitely bought methane from landfills, but I'm not sure. I have the feeling like all the local landfills probably don't have like a national organization. Maybe they do. I don't know how much. I don't think they would have much lobbying influence, but they might. Yeah, because there would be a loss of income for them for sure if they.
Yeah.
I have asked Mike Parkowski that question before, because, obviously what we're trying to do is reduce what goes there, and they are funded by tipping fees. And he didn't, I don't know if this is like the party line or not, but Mike didn't seem worried about it. He's just like I don't know. He publicly, to me anyway, he didn't seem worried about tipping fees, being reduced as we get different kinds of materials diverted or reduced going there. But
I was thinking they could always raise the tipping fee and get the same amount.
Yeah, I think they probably have to, right? Or but a related question, Bridget, to one of yours I have is, I was surprised we're not, but I've certainly seen the food waste hierarchy pyramid before, or reverse pyramid. But I hadn't really looked at it before. I was surprised that composting is below the energy recapture. Shouldn't composting be above that? Bridget, you're nodding. You agree?
From my experience, and I'll let you jump in, Bernat, but no, I think industries have a differing opinion. And so I know from the Community Composting Coalition, that's by Institute for Local Self-Reliance, they've been petitioning the EPA for a while now to move that around.
It makes sense. I think that makes sense.
I don't know what, and I've heard rumor that the EPA was considering changing it, but I don't know. What are your thoughts, Bernard?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think you can think about the benefits that composting has, right? And the fact that you're probably you're not burning, food to generate energy. So I do think there has to be a kind of an assessment of the actual risk that it takes, because there's a lot of bioenergy, right? And it sounds very good, but I think there needs to be an assessment of what it means, and an actual life cycle assessment of the impacts that things are having. And I wonder, people may be thinking, well, maybe in the future this is done by fuels that are not, renewable fuels, right? And like, so then does that change? I don't know, right? Like, I don't know, as we innovate on the fuels that we use, whether that means that certain practices become more or less preferred. I would like to see the pyramid as something that changes as the technologies that we have change and as the advances that we're making change. But I do think that and where I focused the most was those two, like at the very other end of the pyramid, right? The landfill, which is the food has made it to the end, to we're feeding people. And I think that's where we approached the bill, or the idea was that issue. That but good point, and one that I guess I didn't I'd given a lot of thought on how the rest of the pyramid is structured, and whether that is up for change at some point.
Yeah, it just seems to me like composting is more circular for that material than, whereas burning it for energy is not. I guess you could kind of argue that it's circular, but not really. I mean, I think that's more linear, and so if we're aiming for a circular economy, it makes sense, I think.
I think
and regenerative farming, I mean, doesn't it kind of go with all that? So
I think typically it's touted as, easier, probably like Bernat was saying, life cycle analysis wise, it's easier to take the organic waste and put it in a facility and digest it that way, instead of going through the process and the labor and whatever else technology wise is used for compost. I guess at like an industrial, I don't know. But as he said,
Well,
like everything is changing
could be
so
also,
much so quickly.
Could be also the
I'm not sure
infrastructure that we have. I'm just not sure about how the methodology was used for EPA, and that would be something that would be interesting to kind of know whether this is something that they revise periodically, or this was something that was first decided a few years ago and hasn't been revised since. It will be interesting to dig a little more.
Yeah, I think this is also very timely for anybody in Delaware. The BioDevco plant that it's been composting, I guessing chicken manure or something previously, and it just was expanded now to accept a lot more from Delaware and other states, I believe. And so that was it is a huge deal for Sussex, as well as there's a huge environmental justice complaint that was out right now that the EPA is looking into, but that's the only digester type facility in our state, at least at an industrial level. But there are some other small scale or anaerobic systems that some businesses and schools have been piloting in our state, just so people.
David, I know you've been putting some stuff in the chat. Do you want to unmute and actually ask any questions?
Well, no. I think my questions have basically all been addressed. I was just thinking, well, the one that wasn't was kind of far-fetched. I was just thinking about how, in order for people to feel safe eating food left over from our kitchen, in our culture, we'd almost have to have them sitting at our table so they could see us eating it at the same time, so they don't think we poisoned it or spiked it or something, and they'd know we were healthy. It's mind-boggling. But I was trying to think about how that's what led to the question of, do we know whether there is a domesticated animal, a rat or a dog or something that people who are living out of their cars could use when they go dumpster diving, so that if the animal eats the food, they know it's safe for them. You know,
I feel like the dog may just eat it. You know, I don't know. I have a dog, and he probably will be like, "Oh, it's food. Let's go." Like, would not really give much thought to whether the
yeah.
food is good or no.
Well,
But I do think that goes to the research. I think it goes to two parts. I think it goes to the extensive research that we need to show people the data and the evidence that just because something says best used by doesn't mean that we're losing quality of the product. I think having robust data on that may help people understand. I think the change of the labelings may be essential for that behavioral change as well. And I think it also goes, and I think you mentioned the high cost of things, right? I think people and the consumer being more mindful about, especially when things are costing so much, about how much food we're buying that we actually need, rather than picking a whole thing for a week and forgetting about things that are at the end of the fridge. I think really being conscious about buying the exact food that we need rather than letting it, forgotten in the fridge. But as I said, I think it does take a lot of that behavioral change. I think what's in a way in our advantage is that no one likes to throw food. It doesn't make people good when they're throwing food. So I think we already have something, one, that is that people don't like the behavior, and it's just a matter of providing the tools to making sure that they're not placed in a situation in which they have to do it. And but if you never know, maybe in 10 years there is a dog that doesn't like food but will sniff and will let us know whether it's good or no. But so far, mine is definitely not going to help.
Well, I know rats have been trained to sniff out things like landmines and so on. So, maybe if you have a fancy circus rat, you're safe dumpster diving. I don't have that problem here, but people are going hungry all over the world. So I was curious about that. That's really not germane to our discussion. I did wonder, on the heels of that other question about methane in landfills, what portion of the methane actually is attributable to food versus other kinds of biomass. And I know that there's effort to divert, Bridget, you're a great part of that, other kinds of biomass, like, out here, there's brush and other stuff that can be chipped and so on. But I just posted in the chat, the trouble is if you make a deep enough chip pile and you just leave it there, then I think it starts going anaerobic too, because not enough oxygen is going through it. So then methane is just leaking freely into the air. It's a puzzle.
It really is. And I believe that it's all about organic materials, right? It doesn't have to be always food that causes methane. But again, I think for the sake of kind of framing the issue, especially in the Hill, framing it as a food, approaching it from the food perspective, I think it does really help. But I do agree with you that it's a challenging issue, but I do think it gives opportunities. And I think, especially as there are so many technologies that are being developed now in order to address like CO2 emissions, and we can think about, hydrogen deployment. We have technologies to kind of actually capture CO2 from the air. And so as we're expanding the development and the deployment and making sure that those are not extremely expensive to use, which is a problem that we have now, I think reducing methane and really framing the conversation around methane provides us enough time to actually, speed up, develop those, do more research, implement them, deploy them, so that then we're tackling CO2, mitigation later on. And so I think seeing it strategically on, addressing methane now allows us to keep the warming levels on Earth kind of like in check for a little longer, so that we're then really expanding on the technology front for the CO2 problem.
Awesome. Well, Bernat, we can't thank you enough. It's been a good discussion, and your presentation was really, really informative. And all I could think is, wow, we need to get you in front of more people. So,
and I'll say I'm not a food and waste expert. This has been all about chatting with people with you, like you and other organizations, nonprofits and groups that are actually doing the work. And so this is just kind of a reflection or kind of like an outcome of all of the efforts that groups like yours are putting. And so want to thank you as well for the work that you're doing in Delaware and for sponsoring the bill. So.
Well, thanks. Well, we'll be watching it closely and doing what we can do to help. And please keep in touch wherever you end up next. I hope we keep in touch.
Yeah, and if there's any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to kind of provide any resources, but there are many, and especially if you're wondering on that food waste impact, I think Digital Food Waste Coalition and ReFed has great analysis and work and graphs that really kind of explains comprehensively this issue and can educate a lot of folks. So really appreciate the invitation for me to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bernat.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
How about everybody has a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.